Welcome back to Philosophy for Flourishing, the show where we explore principles and practices for living the best, most fulfilled life possible. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Peter Boghossian. I'm a huge fan. I've been teaching classes on persuasive writing for a couple of years. And literally every time I do, I reference how to have impossible conversations. Sometimes I bring in his other book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. And I'm constantly recommending those books to people that want to help spread better ideas.
Thank you.
It's a huge honor to have you on the show, Peter.
Thank you. I sincerely appreciate it. And I appreciate the recommendations to help make the world a little more civil.
So I thought it was really interesting that on your first book, on the back of your first book, Manual for Creating Atheists,
right,
you introduce yourself to the world, so to speak, with Dr. Peter Boghossian is a full-time faculty member in Portland State University's philosophy department. He was thrown out of the doctoral program in the University of New Mexico's philosophy department.
Right.
I just thought that was so interesting. So maybe we could just start with a little bit of background. Like, how do you get thrown out of a philosophy program? And how do you decide that that's the thing that you want to lead with when you're, introducing yourself on your first book?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people have asked me that. I've never really told the answer. They threw a lot of us out. Actually, I wasn't the only one. Boy, that was just so long ago. I never think about that stuff anymore. But why did I lead with that? That's a very good question. A combination of reasons. I believe in just letting it all out there, exposing the worst, or not even the worst, just a kind of radical honesty in a sense. But beyond that, can I swear on your podcast?
Go for it.
It was a big fuck you to everybody. I think at core, I'm a pugilist. both
yeah, I get that.
Yeah, intellectually, actually physically as well. So I thought about it, and I talked about it with my editor. If you ever read The Onion, you ever read The Onion, the satirical online magazine? Yeah, the guy who co-founded that, Chris Johnson, was the editor of my first book. He was a really close friend of mine, but he's ghosted me. I think he's pissed at me because my second book, I didn't have him as my editor. So he hasn't talked to me. I keep calling him and telling him, hey, Chris, don't ghost me. Anyway, so I did it for a number of reasons, and it's always good to just let those things out there. You're just taking no prisoners. I also have thought, I've also thought for decades now that the discipline of philosophy is sick.
Mm-hmm. Wow, we can definitely dig into that. I have to say, I 100% agree. I was on my way into a grad program in philosophy when, thankfully, I was lured into just straight into the world of publishing on philosophy and commenting on current events and things like that. And I think my lucky stars that I was, because it's a mess.
Yeah, it's not only a gateway. Sorry to interrupt. It's not only a gateway to irrelevance, and I don't mean on the job market. I mean kind of intellectual irrelevance. But it's. I published a piece about this in the Philosopher's Magazine that my colleagues lost their minds about. My former colleague, called "Diluted Departments." It's not only that it's a gateway to irrelevance, but in many senses, it actually makes your epistemic situation worse. And I see that I see that with people I know pretty well who are learned scholars, philosophers, well published, and they've really become mouthpieces for the dominant moral orthodoxy, this critical social justice ideology, and their epistemic situation is worse because they happen to be better at making arguments, so they're better at coming up with good reasons for bad conclusions. And this idea that somehow the philosophers, particularly as it's become institutionalized in the academy, are the gatekeepers of reason is just pure nonsense. They're just not. They're the mouthpieces of the orthodoxy right now, and that's what that piece argues, among other things.
Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, it was true, right, that the philosophers were sort of the gatekeepers of the intellect. But it's long since been the case that the barbarians are not only at the gate, they're now running the show in our universities. I mean, you're the second philosopher that I've interviewed who has left the world of academia just in recent years.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just a telltale sign of where things are and where they're going. And we can certainly dive into postmodernism and
anything you want. 100%. And literally anywhere you want to go, anything you want to talk about, anything. I can also throw out some potential avenues of exploration, whatever you want to do. I'm just chilling with my cold brew.
Well, I thought it was so interesting that you led with that, and it certainly gives you some gadfly street cred. I know you're big, or seem to be a big fan of Socrates.
I am huge fan. Huge fan.
Yeah, me too. So you grew up in Beantown in Boston, my neck of the woods. I'm from New Hampshire, but I live just outside of Boston now. And it's a well-educated area. Just out of curiosity, like, were your parents academics, or what did they do?
Where outside of Boston you live?
Franklin.
Oh, okay,
it's like
cool.
50 minutes west. First town named after Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, I know exactly where it is. I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, Norwood. My parents are first generation. My dad's parents fled the genocide in Armenia. My dad was a civil engineer. Both my parents have passed now. My dad was a civil engineer, and my mom was a medical office manager. And it was a really interesting. My parents were just really, really good people, and I also got shaped by the whole genocide thing. That's one of the reasons I feel so strongly about Ukraine now. But yeah, I think I was incredibly fortunate to have the upbringing that I had.
And at some point you got interested in philosophy, and you've now come to see that it's a bit of a mess. So like, what was the development there? What was the sort of gateway drug for you? You like staying up late with friends, doing thought experiments into the wee hours in the morning, like thinking about categorical imperatives, or what was it?
I've always wanted to take everything to its deepest level, in a sense. It reminds me of a very good friend of mine who wanted to have the most intense experiences life could offer. So he dropped LSD and called an ambulance on himself to see what that experience would be like. It's a long time ago, but he was a very, very good friend of mine. I loved Socrates. I think the Apology was really what turned me on, and then the Republic. I still read the Republic semi-regularly. I just wanted to go as deep as you can, and I wanted to figure out what's true. I've shifted those goals somewhat. I want to be less wrong more often, but I think it was in all my friendships were, Aristotle talks about tiers of friendships or what have you. I was fortunate to truly learn at a young age that the highest form of friendship really is between virtuous people. And
character friendship.
Yeah, there's something so incredibly profound about that it eludes articulation at a fundamental level for why that is. But if one doesn't participate in that oneself, but does that answer your question?
Yeah, you're interested. It sounds like you just in general have both the curiosity and the intellectual integrity to know what you know and what you don't know, and the drive to figure out the answers, to figure out what you don't know. And that really that's what.
Yeah, I just wanted to drill down as deep as I could go in various things. That's why I like jujitsu so much. I just wanted to just drill down and figure out. I just really enjoy thinking. I don't really want to talk about myself too much more. I think playing in the realm of ideas is far more interesting to me than playing in the realm of people. I've written a bunch of screenplays, and I've always had to rewrite those to be more character focused than idea focused. But I just love that idea of just truly just opening your heart and opening your mind and drilling down. And then within that specifically, I personally am attracted to the idea and I coined it, and you mentioned my first book, Street Epistemology, of how do we take philosophy out of the academy and put it in the street? How do we give people the tools of professional philosophers, the tools to think in very clear ways, in very open ways, and very honest ways? And I've spent a long time developing those techniques. I mean, it's my life's work.
Yeah, this is the connection with Socrates, right? I mean, he was the true original street epistemologist. Perhaps some of the sophists might lay claim to that. I'm not sure. So people, they probably know you, if they know you at all, from your books, A Manual for Creating Atheists. The other one I mentioned, How to Have Impossible Conversations. You're also known for the Sokol Squared thing, where you guys expose the bankruptcy of grievance studies. More recently, for the very public resignation from Portland State University.
Right.
You were there for 10 years. And just last personal question, I promise, because I'm just curious about this. You were there as a non-tenure track professor for 10 years, correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm just kind of curious, like, was that because your thinking was so far outside of what is considered acceptable that you weren't tenure track, or maybe it's just something more general and less
No, I just wasn't on tenure track. I started as an instructor. Sorry, that's my dog. I started as an instructor of philosophy, and then I skipped senior instructor and I went to assistant professor. And then the position was just there. It just wasn't offered.
Yeah.
And I was actually, if you read the acknowledgments in my book, one of my colleagues told me, you could publish 10 books from Harvard, you'd never get tenure here. And I was incredibly grateful. Actually, that was one of the lines that really nudged me to be more, to have a more public facing orientation toward philosophy. Because I didn't really care about, so a lot of people want to be buttoned up. I mean, this is really an endemic problem among philosophers in particular. Actually, I'll tell you who, should I tell you? Somebody said to me, I'm trying to say who said this to me without giving away who said this to me. But if you make one video that does fairly well, you'll reach more people than who'll ever read anything you publish ever, unless it's like, a Gettier problem, something like unbelievably revolutionary. But Dan Dennett, I'm very fond of talking about Dan Dennett's idea of abiding significance. Many people wallow in ideas of no abiding significance whatsoever. And I just talked about this, I think, with the interview in Brown, the problem of the heap, how many grains of sand make a heap. I mean, just idiotic things. And there's a lot of brain power wasted. I think it's the average number of papers in the humanities. I think this is true, is cited between 0 and 2 times. I think that's true, but something like that. It could even be between 0 and 1. So you have a lot of horsepower going to what? Sorry, she wants to get out of her crate. She's not going to get. I'm re-upping my training. I have this problem with one of my dogs. I had sent my dogs to the trainer and sent me this manual about how to. So just ignore the crying.
We should talk about that after. My wife's a dog trainer, and I have.
Oh, is she really?
Tips and tricks. Oh man, do I?
Oh wow, that's great. Yeah. So I had a dog who was having some issues, and so, but anyway, so that's excuse me, that's I think the discipline of philosophy is not even in trouble. It's been just completely compromised. I just have no respect for academic philosophy as an institution, and it shows. I was thrown out of a philosophy program. Like the issues, although the issues with Portland State were more so ideological with the university. You can see that from that video a little bit, that with the sociologist. Then they had to do with philosophy, although that was a big part of it. Even my department voted, I think in our last department meeting I was in, they wanted to put the word equity in, and there was no conversation about it. There was just, it's a philosophy department, right? And so we're going to vote to change the department constitution. And I was the only one who said no. And I wasn't given an opportunity to present my case. I mean, think about that for a second. That's remarkable. And that's really remarkable for a philosophy department, that we're going to change. We're just going to take a vote. Nobody's going to have an opportunity to really speak to it. Really? Okay. Well,
we're philosophers, but we're not open to arguments.
Right. Well, that's the idea. The idea is that they believe that they have the right answers to moral questions. So in spite of all of this wrestling with ideas in the philosophical literature, the history of Western intellectual thought, their moral minds have overridden their rational minds. That's why this ideology is so toxic. It's so powerful. It's so pervasive. It's so dominant.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you mentioned that quote, because that was actually the quote that made me think something sinister was going on.
What quote?
Published 10 books through Harvard and never get tenured there.
Yeah.
I mean, to be told something like that indicates to me that there's a deep divide between the things that you stand for and the things that PSU is likely to endorse in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Let's linger on that. So that's really important. So whenever anybody tells you something like that, the response should always be thank you. The response should not be fuck you, or you bastard, or and none of that stuff. The response, well, I personally am really grateful when people are honest with me. I mean, so few people are honest about anything anymore. I mean, it's truly I don't know if it's more culturally acute now than before. My dog is driving me nuts. I don't know if it's more culturally. I might have to let her out, and when
that's
she's
fine,
and put her on the couch. But then I think she'll go crazy down here. But no, when people say things like that to you, the response to that should always be thank you. And that's actually what my response was. Oh, thanks for telling me that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, provided the question is not, well, why do you say that? But if you think they have good reason to say it and it's true, then absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, when I was heavily involved in the new atheist movement, whenever anyone would tell me I'm going to go to hell, I would always thank them. Like, that's a person you can have a conversation with. There's an honest person. There's not someone who's telling you God is love and everything is equal and fair. And no, you're going to go to hell. Okay, well, I appreciate that. Then you can have a conversation. That's an honest person.
So I definitely deeply share your goal of making philosophy useful for people again. And that's the whole point of this podcast. It's actually the whole point of the organization Objective Standard Institute that sponsors this thing. The institute that puts on the conference you're going to be speaking at in June. So, there's a deep shared value there. And I think probably the best phrase to capture that is the one that you coined, street epistemology.
Right.
So for those who don't know what that means, maybe they don't even know what epistemology means, do you mind to just give us a little bit of a description?
Sure. Street epistemology is the idea is that you take epistemology out of the academy and you put it into the street. You take epistemology, study of knowledge, basically how you know what you think you know, study of knowledge, and you bring it from an academic subject, an academic pursuit, to everyday life with everyday people out of the academy. And I stepped away from that for a while, a long time, because I didn't want, and I was telling all the guys that the community has developed like way beyond what I ever imagined it could be. It's remarkable. The resources that are out there are incredible. Anthony Magnabosco's videos are mind-blowing. All of these people are doing incredible. I mean, I've been watching videos to prepare for a talk on that. And I stepped away from that. You mentioned Sokol Squared because of the Sokol Squared stuff. I didn't want street epistemology to be tainted with my other pursuits, especially if it didn't go well for me. And I didn't want it to be relegated. James Randi from the James Randi Educational Foundation was gay, and he never was public about that because he didn't, at the time, we had a very different view about homosexuality, the pervading dominant Christian narrative of sin or what have you. And then, or just so many people harboring animus against homosexuals. But I also wanted to not just separate, but almost divorce myself from street epistemology because I didn't want it to be contaminated by my critiques of critical social justice and that whole suite of disciplines that are, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And thank you for mentioning those videos. We'll definitely link to those in the show notes. I highly recommend people check them out. You can learn a lot more about street epistemology in a manual for creating atheists.
Let me just say it's been so, okay. So the community now has developed things that are way beyond that at this point. And I know I've just downsold that book, but I'm interested in what's true and giving people the best information.
Honesty.
So, I'll send you some links, like Street Epistemology International, run by Reed Nicewonder. His station is Cordial Curiosity. They've developed tools. They've taken this. It's really like how gods would speak to each other. That's what street epistemology is.
How gods would speak to each other. Can you explain that? Is that what you said? Gods?
Yeah. I think I've told this story a couple times before. I was watching an old show long time ago, Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict. Gene Roddenberry was, come on. He's wrote Star Trek, but he wrote this cheesy, schlocky sci-fi show when they had these advanced beings called the Synod. And I was watching that long time ago, and these advanced beings were communicating with each other, trying to figure stuff out. And I thought to myself, Lola, sorry about that. I thought to myself, there's no possible way. I mean, advanced beings would simply never communicate like that. And then I started thinking, okay, well, how would advanced beings communicate? They would communicate through street epistemology. There'd be no other way. They would ask perfectly targeted Socratic questions. We'll bracket the language thing for a second, the changes in the linguistic structure. And they would communicate in a way that we see manifest now in contemporary street epistemology. And you can watch how they would communicate in those videos. They'd be able to, by simple targeted questions, they'd be able to ascertain their confidence levels and things and the justifications they have for their beliefs. My piece that I'm going to write this piece. I've been so freaking busy, I haven't had a chance, but I'm going to make the argument in a piece that every spacefaring civilization at its core must have some element of falsification and broadly Socratic principles, or they'd be incapable of developing space travel.
Underlying that, the scientific method. That's really interesting. We just did, the journal I work for, the Objective Standard, just published an interview with Robert Zubrin. And it'd be interesting to see how those ideas kind of, mate. Yeah. So street epistemology, you're giving some characterizations here. I kind of think of it as this is a means of helping people ferret out the things they think they know, but they don't really know, and helping them drop those ideas that probably are not serving their life and pick up better ideas, right? Pick up more rational ideas that they can use.
Yeah, almost. It's a way to see if the confidence in your conclusions is justified by the reasons that you have. So in a sense, it's a way to calibrate your confidence. It's a way to gently and kindly reflect on your beliefs. I have an app that does this. It took way too much time. It was way too much of a, and I think that's the other thing. I think my colleagues hated that the app, because it wasn't a traditional academic thing. Using my former colleagues, and it's called Atheos. I think it's ATHEOS. We don't support that anymore, but you can get that online. But yeah, so we did a reverse Q&A tour, and you can see those in the videos. We put tape on a sidewalk, and we made a Likert scale. So it's like visual, strongly agree. I can't remember the next one.
Agree, somewhat agree.
Yeah, that's it. Neutral. Yeah, that's it. And then all the way to strongly disagree. And so we would ask somebody a question. Doesn't matter. You could literally do it with anything. You can ask, or we'd make a statement, not a question, make a statement. And then there are only two rules to the game. You can't stand in between the lines. You got to stand on the line. And you can't move. It's astonishing how often people don't follow the rules. We have all these videos. The second rule is you can't move until I say go, and everybody always move when they move. I don't know. It's just apparently there's more to it than that. But and so then we'd examine those beliefs. I'd ask targeted Socratic questions, and then that evolved throughout the course of the tour. But those are videos, and we released those. One was that we released: should the Colorado State Police, campus police, be abolished? So that you can see that. Oh, and there's the one that is gender. The gender is a spectrum, or there are only two genders. Yeah. So statements, and then we conduct street epistemology to ask people if they actually, if they believe that the reasons they have justify the confidence they have in their belief.
Yeah. So there you're focusing on the epistemology, focusing on their means of knowing or claiming to know what they know. And there I see a link, of course, between street epistemology and effective conversations.
Right.
And really, I see these live experiments that you're doing as a form of having a whole bunch of interesting and potentially effective conversations, all kind of wrapped up into one interesting social experiment. So maybe we could transition now into what you mean. I think most people can probably discern from themselves from their own experience what you mean by impossible conversations. But just to get your thinking on the table, you've got a book, How to Have Impossible Conversations. What, for those who haven't read it, are these impossible conversations? What kind of conversations?
An impossible conversation is not a conversation that someone doesn't want to have with you. So there's no book that you can read if someone wants to walk away. It's not like hitting someone over the head with a crowbar, putting them in your trunk, waiting until they wake up, and then speaking to them. A possible conversation is a conversation across a deep divide or a gulf that you think is absolutely impossible. Like there's no way we can get abortion would be one that people just feel so strongly about right now. And you can see that play out in the culture. So, the book gives people in 7 chapters, simple, easy techniques to follow, to make possible conversations that they thought were impossible.
Yeah. And when I think of impossible conversations, I think of another guy who've had the pleasure to interview, actually, Daryl Davis.
Oh, Daryl Davis is he is the definition of impossible conversations. Yeah, Daryl Davis is amazing. He's written in the book all over the place. That's the other thing. If Daryl Davis, a black guy, can go speak to Ku Klux Klan members, then you having a conversation about, I don't know, Ukraine or defunding the place, all those things are just chump change.
Yeah. I mean, he's such a hero for that, and a huge inspiration, and so much to learn from him. So I'm glad he gets lots of credit in your book.
And look what happened to him. People who don't believe in the tools of reason, dialogue, discourse, etc., calling him a white supremacist, which is just, I mean, you should read his thing. I think he had a Facebook post a few years ago about, I've been called all these things, and he actually listed all the names, but I never in my wildest dreams thought I would be called a white supremacist. But that's because a feature of this dominant ideology holds that conversation, discourse, argument, reasoning itself is a tool to uphold privilege, patriarchy, and white supremacy. And so that's the starting belief as they go in. So they don't believe in they don't accept the basic premises of the Enlightenment and even the idea that discourse and conversation should happen across divides. They just don't accept that.
Yeah.
So their starting point is very different.
Yeah, Daryl had a documentary in which he spoke with people from Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And I mean, it ends with them shouting at him. And I believe that's actually the conversation in which he was called a white supremacist.
No, this was another one. I was talking about when Antifa did that.
Okay. So probably similar.
That was before the BLM thing.
Got it.
But that's what you have to do, though. But but we need, this is important. So that's what you have to do when you have moral impulses, but those moral impulses don't stand up to scrutiny. You have to develop either another moral infrastructure that buttresses, undergirds, and supports those moral impulses. Or, I mean, you have a few options. You can develop your own epistemology. That's an option. But you can't engage in dialogue because the reasons that you have are not sufficient to justify your confidence in your conclusions. So they're left with no option. See, even then they participate in the tools of reason, the tools of rationale, to an extent.
Yeah, it's almost like affirmation through denial. There's no way really to get around relying on reason. So if you say reason is impotent, but what you're doing is you're affirming something as a truth, and ergo you're saying that certain things have certain identities and you have the ability to identify them, right?
Go ahead.
Well, I was really curious to dig a little bit more into what you just said about moral impulses and getting under those and perhaps creating your own epistemology. I didn't follow all of that. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more.
Okay. So let's say, thanks for helping me be more clear. So let's say that you have a belief, and your belief is, I'm trying to think, do you think we should do one that is actually someone's belief, or should we make up a belief? Let's say that you want to talk about abortion? That's a hot topic. We talk about, I mean, it really doesn't matter what the belief is, but look, it literally doesn't matter what the belief is.
Okay.
But the reason I asked that is because sometimes if I use an example that's too close to home, everybody will go like this, and they won't, the defensive posture won't go up.
You're not going to offend me. So.
No, it's not about offending you. It's that, excuse me. It's about the more. So let's take a very quick detour. Can we take a quick detour if you don't mind?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's this thing called the Backfire Effect, and it's the idea that if you're presented with actual evidence that goes against your position, you'll hunker down and be more confident. Now that has been subsequently researched to death, if you will. And because it's such an unusual phenomenon, and subsequent studies have shown that was a unicorn effect, and people do not hunker down when they're shown evidence to the contrary. However, if you really are more granular and you really look at that literature, and this has all been in the last 10 years. There's been some fascinating stuff on that. If you really look at that and actually read those papers instead of just the abstracts, you'll see that, and I was actually going to write something about this. I'm just so busy. I haven't had time, but that doesn't hold if the ideas in question have a strong moral valence. So the more the ideas comport with, the way that I would describe it is how one views oneself as a good person. The more one has the belief that believing something that makes one not a good person believe, the more one believes that, the more that will invoke the backfire effect.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a really important thing to know. Or at least you don't have to believe me, but that's a really important thing to at least be cognizant of.
Oh, I believe you. I mean, there's a book called Think Again by Adam Grant. Right. He's a social psychologist at Wharton, and he studied this. He talks about it in Think Again. And I mean, they use the example of like Yankees versus Red Sox fans and putting yourself in that person's shoes. And he goes into some of the studies. It's very interesting. It reminds me of the idea from Nassim Taleb, anti-fragile, like ideas are anti-fragile. You beat them up and they get stronger.
Yeah.
But all this redounds on morality, you're saying.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So I made that detour for a reason, and that's to talk about the backfire effect is most strongly triggered, if you will, though I hate to use that word, but when there's a strong moral valence or moral component to an idea, usually that goes against one's deepest impulses. So, and again, I would argue that relates to what it means to that individual to be a good person. So if one holds a belief, and that belief, let's say that somebody holds a belief. Now, moral epistemology is tricky stuff. That's what I did my dissertation on, the prisons. Moral epistemology is tricky stuff. Regular epistemology is also tricky, but when you add morality, you mentioned abortion, or someone mentioned, probably me mentioned abortion first because I was just reading about it, but you have data points that people can agree upon. Well, okay, well, let's define this as a trimester, or let's define this as, whatever it is, but broadly agree upon. But then the inferences that they make from those data points, they use to support their conclusions, and then ascribe unusually high confidence levels in their conclusions. Let's bracket out the Bible stuff for the moment, and let's just look at the abortion's a tricky one, because undergirding that is a whole moral infrastructure. That's why it's a particularly tricky one to talk about, because you're not really talking about just abortion. You're talking about religion or belief systems or culture. You're just talking about a lot of things. Okay. So let's say, now, if I'm not clear, let me know, because I think this gets complicated fast. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's say that one holds the belief that, X is morally wrong, Y is morally wrong. The next thing you need to do, or what I would do in the context of a conversation, is I would ask someone directly and point blank, on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you in that? Mm-hmm. I published a ton of stuff on this. I did a visual essay for the New York Times on this, but and they can say a few things. I didn't say that to drop the New York Times. I said that if anybody wants to look that up in more detail. But if, let's say the person with whom you're speaking says to you, well, I don't like the scale. Okay, well, you can use any scale you want, 1 to 100 or what have you. And then, 1 being, I'm not at all confident. Nobody will ever say that. 5 being medium, but you say that so that they get an idea of what the scale is, right? At 10 being, I'm absolutely positive. Let's say that they say, 9. So what is the evidence that would constitute a 9? The degree to which there's evidence for a belief, and again, in the realm of morality, this is very complicated. The degree to which there's evidence for a belief and reasons to hold a belief should correlate to one's confidence level. So the issue is, okay, so I think one of the problems that we're seeing now with this moral orthodoxy, in fact, I'm positive this is correct, is that the people who hold these beliefs don't have sufficient evidence to justify the conclusions or the sufficient evidence to justify the confidence in the conclusions. I see that's an emerging theme in this conversation. Yeah. And so when you don't have evidence to justify confidence, but yet want to hold the beliefs tenaciously anyway, you have to do something that makes up for the slack between, can you see my hands here? Between the confidence you have in a belief and the evidence and reasons you have for holding the belief. Now, sometimes that's faith, that will get you there. Sometimes that's making a moral structure like Swinburne does, so that will get you there. So you're making up a whole epistemology, that will get you there. That's denigrating the tools that people use to accurately calibrate their confidence, and then saying, well, look, they don't have the tools anyway. Nobody really knows, and then granting primacy to your moral impulses. So sorry, I'm speaking a lot because this is complicated. So one of the things that you see, you said you had a question about epistemology. They invent things like standpoint epistemology, like lived experience, like you resort from reason, argument, and evidence to the personal experience of people. And Christianity, for example, that would be the lived testimony. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that would be the unequivocal testimony of yogins who claim to have died and re-entered the human womb consciously. So you have different sorts of testimonies that play a cornerstone feature in the epistemology. But those features, those notions that are forwarded have to be forwarded because there's no other reason to justify the confidence in the belief. So you have to basically make shit up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked earlier about how philosophy today is a profession that is hazardous to one's own epistemic hygiene,
correct,
so to speak. And you mentioned faith, and obviously throughout history, faith's been a huge supplier of false epistemologies, things that don't rely on reason. But it seems like philosophy has been weaponized against epistemology, and perhaps much of this has to do with the polylogism of Marx, fragmented by the postmodernists into every sort of warring, distinct group you can think of. Maybe you could say a little bit about that. Like, where are these ideas coming from? Why has epistemology been sort of weaponized against reason?
Well, I'm reading a book right now. I just signed an NDA on. I'm reading a manuscript that explains that. I can't tell you, but this manuscript I'm reading is like, oh my God, it is a masterpiece. It's like the best book on this is Cynical Theories by Helen Pluckrose, is the chief author. It's the best book on this. This book is Cynical Theories times 1,000. It's the single most, it's like 900 pages. It's totally blowing my world. So these are complicated issues. And the problem with this, and Mike Nana is taking this up. His film, I think, is complete. He's taking this up in the film. And part of the problem with answering this question is there's just so much. I mean, many people don't even understand what a peer-reviewed paper is, right? So it's just such a complicated thing to explain. So, and then even if one understands the academic side of this, why is it at this cultural moment that these ideas flourish, to use a word going back to Aristotle? Why is it that those ideas are prevalent now in the larger discourse? Well, this is such a complicated question. I honestly don't even know. Even thinking about that is overwhelming. I'm not even sure where to begin with that. Okay, so let's break it down. So you have this idea of idea laundering, which, in my opinion, this is probably a minority opinion, but I've published about this in a ton of places. I think I first published in the Wall Street Journal about it. It's basically the idea that people discharge their moral impulses, which I just spoke to you about, in peer-reviewed journals, and then they launder it, comes out as knowledge. They teach it to people, then it replicates itself in the university, and they teach these things. It's the cultural milieu. It's applied postmodernism, which that's Helen Pluckrose's term. She's again the lead author of Cynical Theories. She also has another book that's less complicated than Cynical Theories. I haven't read it yet, but it takes the ideas of Cynical Theories and it makes them more palatable to people who aren't academics or in the academy. Far fewer quotations. It's the idea of a kind of the time was right for a grifting class on race grifters, like Ibram Kendi, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Robin DiAngelo, Kendi and Coates in particular. Kendi and DiAngelo in particular, and other people. And then the way that, so the nucleation point of all this stuff is the academy, and the way that people have to sign diversity statements now. Tenure and promotion baskets are based upon exogenous characteristics. That's why they're going after my buddy Joshua Katz at Princeton, like for making the heretical argument that admission to Princeton should be based on merit. People have accused him of racism for that. Yeah, it's a rather astonishing. So you can see it's a very complex thing, but there are many series of overlapping Venn diagrams, but the modal distribution, if you will, the space that the circles are most touching in the Venn diagrams is the university and the academy.
Yeah.
And my fear is that this is about to get a lot worse, a lot faster if Biden signs the if Biden puts student debt. I think there's well over $1 trillion. I don't know how much over $1 trillion. And the current proposal, the last time I looked, is to relieve. Some people like AOC want all student debt. I think that's the case, but I haven't read too closely on it. And other people want up to 10,000. But the problem is, and I think this answers your question, if that's the case, there's those grievance studies will be disincentivized from tethering themselves to reality, right? They're already not based in evidence, logic, reason, and argumentation, and they don't use rigorous methods to look at things that are really important fields of study, domains of thought, like race, gender, and sexuality. Excuse me. If Biden signs that, that's basically, that's people do not understand. They think, people can't get jobs and they're not. Okay. This is far deeper than that. Like orders of magnitude. What this will do to the culture, this will deepen and entrench the culture wars for another generation, or maybe not that long, but certainly a long time, in addition to other problems, which I'm less interested in, like inflation.
And the causal factor there,
the causal factor is that if a discipline is not like gender studies, if it's not, which is already not, it's purely ideological. It's to advocate in certain journals like Fat Studies. It's to advocate certain points of view on issues. And when you take out a mechanism to tether the discipline to reality, well, then you've disincentivized the journal and the academic field from producing material that lawfully aligns with reality. And again, that's why I told you, that's why I was like, oh my God, this is so complicated. Like, yeah, this is so complicated that even to understand that you need to understand so many rudiments to that. Like it's a minimum, like what's a peer-reviewed paper? Like, what does he mean that gender studies isn't tethered to reality? What does he mean? Like, people don't understand. They think that, it's just so complicated. It's just so complicated. That's why I'm like, we could explore this if you want, but it's an insanely complicated thing that we're already going to lose 90% of the people who are listening to this. But the basic idea, unless you're really involved in the academy and involved in this, but if Biden signs that, I am predicting that that being the student loan bill, in which a lot of student loans are then up to a certain amount of money are forgiven. I think that's going to be one of the worst things that could possibly happen.
Yeah, so certainly the history of how postmodernism came about, how these grievance studies came about from that is extremely complex.
Very complex.
One, if I could just give a shout out to one book, and maybe even bring it to your attention if you haven't read it. It's called Explaining Postmodernism by Stephen Hicks.
Yeah, I've read it. Hicks is great. Hicks is fantastic. I saw him debate Thaddeus Russell. I've known Stephen. I had breakfast with Stephen, hung out with Stephen. So he's actually done the homework. He's done so. So Cynical Theories is like, I think that book ends in Cynical Theories is like picks up where that book left off.
Right.
Hicks's strength is, Foucault, Derrida, Lyotard, the classical, and you should I'd also direct your readers to how French intellectuals ruin the West, or how French postmodernism. I can't remember the group, but our article by Helen Pluckers in Aereo magazine a few years ago. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful piece. But Hicks does Hicks has clearly done his homework, and he's clearly read this stuff, and he knows it well. And that's when cynical theories picks up where Hicks left off.
Yeah, so for anyone who's really interested in the causes of our current predicament, you can go all the way back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant with Hicks's book, and then take it all the way to the present day with cynical theories. And I'm really interested in the book that you just signed an NDA to review.
I'm telling you, if you read this, you'll have a PhD level understanding of the stuff. I mean, it is absolutely the most meticulous. I can't talk about it, but I will tell you that this is the Bible of this stuff. This is the gold. This is the adamantium, the adamantite stand. I mean, this book is truly. I don't know where the guy found the time to do this, but it'll be out I don't know when it'll be out, but I'll definitely be promoting it. It's an astonishing tome.
Well, I'll definitely be waiting to see what you say about it. As far as this bill to forgive student debt, I think like understanding the effect of that comes down to basic economics, right? If you no longer have a tie to the market, where it's, well, I have to pay a certain amount of money to get a degree in a field, so that field has to then pay me back so that I can, justify having that expense. Well, then there's your tie to reality, right?
Right. The only problem with that argument, though, is that assumes that the purpose of the academy and the purpose of these disciplines is to give people jobs, is to fuel the economy in some way. And I think there's a very good argument to be made, at least in the classical humanities, that the purpose is to create educated citizens that thus contribute to a vibrant democracy. And so, but they're not doing that. In fact, they're doing literally the opposite, the absolute opposite: attacks on democracy, attacks on sovereignty, attacks on rule of law. So they're not doing that. So that argument would fall. But the argument that you made, that's an argument to be made if one buys that the function of the university is to produce people capable of economic independence. In fact, at Portland State University, the president said that, and I've probably said this literally in 100 podcasts at this point, that the primary purpose of the university, and read his exact quotation, just Google it, is racial justice. So he wants the entire institution organized toward racial justice. In fact, when we ask people, in fact, Reed Nicewonder did some, remember I mentioned the Likert scales, we put the tape on the sidewalk and ask, he would ask people if one, how big of a problem is racism? And one being at Portland State University. How big of a problem is racism at Portland State University? One being completely non-existent, 10 being people are actually enslaved. Black people are enslaved, and all that entails. Many of the people would say that the people we have testimonies from on film said, 5, 4, 6. Yeah, that's an utterly astonishing statement.
Yeah, I wish it were more astonishing. It almost doesn't surprise me, having seen these things about privilege walks and what's happening now, even at the elementary level, is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, I've been shouting about this for years, and nobody listened to me. Nobody. We've all been shouting. There are like 3 of us who've been screaming about this for years, and now look where we are. It went from there's no problem to it's fringe faculty and fringe departments to it's fringe departments to it's just humanities to okay, it will never leak out of the academy, and now look where we are. And so, what are you going to do? I mean, what are you going to do? We could have done something about this when I started screaming about it. We could have done something. We could have slowed it. It's like a tugboat. It's like a tugboat. We could have tried to tug it in the other direction with a lot of effort. But now it's too late.
You are doing something about it, and I definitely commend that. I mean, not only have you written these books, but if I gather correctly, you are part of a university that's in the works, University of Austin. Is that still happening?
Correct. I'm doing 2 things. I have a nonprofit, National Progress Alliance, and so that the goal of that is to move the needle on wokeism or critical social justice ideology and all of the manifestations. And every time you talk about that, people, cancel culture. Cancel culture is just one little wart. University of Austin. So we're building something, we're making something. So I'm not just sitting here to you complaining about the deranged maniacs who have, to use a turn of phrase that I love, ideological capture of these institutions. We're building something, we're making something, we're giving people an alternative. So if they don't like the censoriousness and illiberalism of that's taken over most universities, certainly some more than others, then they can choose a university founded on the fearless pursuit of truth, and that's what it is. It is world-class faculty, fearless pursuit of truth. Hersey, who will be speaking at the event, will be there. Neil Ferguson, the famous historian, is there. Dorian Abbott, the University of Chicago, current University of Chicago professor, will be speaking about global warming. Deidre McCluskey will be speaking about capitalism and economics. And these are truly the courses this summer are forbidden classes. And I'll be teaching in that program things that shouldn't be forbidden, but yet are forbidden. And they're going to be some pretty remarkable, and I know because I'm giving the intro of how to have those impossible conversations, what to do if you're offended, or what to. Hersey, I think, is teaching about radical Islam, child marriage, female genital mutilation. That's from the 3 planks of the AHA Foundation. So we're building, we're making. We're not sitting around complaining and saying, "Woe is me."
Yeah. Congratulations on that. It's really exciting to see that coming together.
It's Pano, it's Barry Weiss, it's Heather Hying, it's Neil Ferguson on the board of directors. They have done, it's Joe Lonsdale. They have now, this is public, so I can tell you this. They have now 100 million and 500 acres. 100 million in less than a year. $100 million and 500 acres. Of course, making a university takes considerably more money, but not more acres.
Right.
So they're going to start building. So that's what I want to do. I'm sick of listening to people complain about this. I want to make an alternative where people, tuition payers, can send their kids, and people can send themselves. And the first crop of students, like the Forbidden Class program, it's all scholarship, 100% scholarship. It's free.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of Thomas Jefferson's University of Virginia and the ideas behind that, to teach future Americans the ideas that really helped create America.
Yeah, and the original University of Chicago, I just listened to a presentation from Neil Ferguson about that. How that was created is pretty remarkable. So Pano, who came from the Great Books program, and I've been a big believer of reading those original texts before one reads secondary or tertiary texts. Big, I just think that's like my love. You asked me at the beginning of the podcast. It was reading Plato's Apology and the Republic, and then other things like the Laws and et cetera, and the Euthyphro and the Meno. But anyway, the idea being, at least part of it is rooted in those great books and places where sincere inquirers can ask questions, and you can have dialogue and debate and conversation about things. And we're sorely lacking that. It's interesting, I do these events. I told you we went on the reverse Q&A, and even before that, I was at Princeton giving a talk with some constitutional lawyers, friends of mine, and there were two security guards in the room, and then a cop. I believe they were armed, but I'm not sure. I don't remember. But the point is, we'd go to do these events, and we'd have security guards and armed officers in these events. And then I was in Hungary for 2 months, and I toured the country, and I spoke all around the country. And I know, we've never met or anything. I'm just telling you I swear to you, what I'm about to tell you is true. I did not see, it doesn't mean they were not there. I did not see a single security guard or cop at any of the events I went to. And there were just hundreds of people in the audience, hundreds and hundreds. I didn't see literally one police officer or security guard, and I put that out. I put a tweet out about that. And, when I was in Budapest, I put a tweet out about the difference between those my experiences in Hungary giving talks or just being in Hungary, being in Budapest, and my experiences in the United States or in Portland or events. And, everyone was like, oh, you bootlicker, you fascist lover, you're a Bon, you're a pig, Nazi. Well, Budapest is run by the opposition. They hate Fidesz, the ruling party. And I just found that to be so interesting, how people have their own preconceived notions. But anyway, the idea being that it is a sad commentary on our universities now when, and you've seen the videos we've released. I mean, these are the most uncontroversial things you can imagine, like truly helping people figure out the reasons the reasons for their beliefs and seeing if they should, and asking them under what conditions they should revise their beliefs. And this is so controversial that we need multiple security guards and armed police officers in the United States events. When I do events at Portland, and I fully admit that Portland is kind of a special case of derangement, we'd have whole SWAT teams. I did one with Christina Hoff Sommers and Dave Rubin, have whole SWAT teams there. I did another one with Christina Hoff Sommers and Brett and Heather, and massive security was there. I mean, armed police officers, people with shields. People have made videos of that. You can see that. It's pretty crazy. But that's the current state of the university. And we're going to build something better in Austin. We're going to build a different culture.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. I think, one interesting thing is that taking offense to everything is actually pretty expensive, right? I mean, not to simplify things here. We obviously have a huge ideological context that we've already been talking about that isn't really present there, I'd imagine. But
right. So just linger on that. Okay. So the reason that you have to take offense is because, remember the little scale I said? The reason that you have to take offense is because you don't have evidence and argument. If you just had evidence and argument, you just present the evidence and argument. There'd be no reason to take offense. The reason that you need police officers there is because you don't have evidence and argument. It's because you view the event itself as privilege preserving. You view the event itself as upholding whiteness, white supremacy, and patriarchy. So you don't need to develop the tools to counter the arguments, or you don't need to have events that counter those. You can dismantle and disrupt, quote unquote.
I want to dig into that more, but I also want to be conscious of time. I'd like to also talk about a little bit about effective conversations.
Yeah, and I have to go pretty soon. I have to pick up my. I have to go pretty soon.
Okay, so we should skip to that topic then. So, can you just give us an idea of some of the tools for effective conversations that you're going to go into more depth on at TOSCon this summer?
I'm trying to think of how to do this without giving away the show.
Maybe just one or two.
Okay, so I have one deliverable that I'm going to try to punch home that I'll save, and I'm going to give people a template that they can use completely foolproof. I'm going to guide them through a structure. I'm going to talk about building rapport. I'm going to talk about the use of scales. We talked about here a little bit, how confident is somebody, just asking someone point blank, well, just, how confident are you in that? I'm going to talk about, it's remarkable. I've probably asked that question tens of thousands to people at this point. I think I've had maybe 2 handfuls of people who have not answered that question directly or did not want to answer that question directly. It's a remarkable tool. And I'll tease out exactly what you can do with it, which we have not gone into this here in this podcast. I'm going to teach people how to ask disconfirmation questions and what those mean. So basically targeted questions, under what conditions would people be willing to revise their beliefs? I'll talk about the answers that they can give. So I'm going to give people a foolproof template that they can use. I'm going to talk about how to question, how to ask better questions. I'm going to talk about how to frame it on epistemology, how to keep your cool throughout the whole thing. and then how to close those conversations. So the talk itself is extremely practical. So anyone who sits through that talk and listens to that talk will literally immediately be able to use those tools within seconds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found them already extremely helpful. I lead a reading group, and I don't know if you get flack for this, but just in having conversations with my wife, I find some of these things very, very useful. Your wife might, well, I know that she's talked about a little bit in this book in exemplifying some of the principles there. So that's great. One of the things that came up, and this will be my last question, because I know you've got to go.
Yeah, I have to go.
One of the things that comes up again and again in these conversations is the acceptability of definitions.
Yeah,
and I'm wondering,
right.
Do you subscribe to a particular theory of definitions?
No. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, I post conversations that I have that are bad. So my failed conversations, and many of those are failed because I assumed a word. Like there's one I'm thinking of, the conversation which borders. The word was borders. I just assumed it was a common word. Everybody had the same definition of borders. It's really important. The more controversial the proposition is that one is examining, the more urgent a definition is. And so as a general rule, I'll just ask people what they mean by that. And then I'll ask follow-up questions to make sure that we're on the same page. As a general rule, I'll just let anybody use any definition they want, as long as I know that I understand it. And then to see if their belief, if what follows from the definition, their belief accords with what they've just said. So you're absolutely correct asking for the definition of words. In the first book, I spent a considerable amount of time on the word faith. That is one of the things that can derail a conversation very quickly and can make it really go downhill fast, or you'll be like two ships passing each other in the night, right? So you'll think, which is what's happened in these failed conversations. My failed conversations, many of them, I thought that I was on the same page with someone else when I simply was not. And I didn't, even though I wrote a book on it, I simply did not do the necessary work that I should have.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think rhetorically, it's often just the case that you have to accept the definitions. I'd love to talk to you more at some point about definitions and how to get to valid ones, even if that's not rhetorically useful or useful in an effective conversation. I just think it's a fascinating topic, and
I agree.
Potentially is necessary for that. So
yeah, I agree that the key in every situation is always the same, is to figure out. It's to figure out what people mean when they use a word. And we'll talk about Martin Bailey the next time. And also to figure out is to take the definition that they use and try to run with it a little bit. And that's been one of my weaknesses in the past. And how do we adjudicate the meanings of words? So those conversations will be derailed because you'll just be talking about two different things. So like the video we just released was gender was a good one.
Yep.
And it's not easy to, it's just, there are so many things now, like the meanings of words have changed, like the meaning of race has changed. And so you don't just adjudicate those by looking them up. But so you basically ask somebody what they mean and really make sure that you have a good understanding of what they mean before you proceed. And if you nitpick somebody, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it will invoke a defensive posture and the conversations won't be as successful. But by the same token, you also have to have an agreed upon definition that you can move forward that doesn't tilt the conversation unnecessarily toward one conclusion.
Yeah, and that's my great worry, is that without a solid theory of definition, and this is really more of a long-term game than it is the conversation you're having that person then and there. But I think long-term, we need a better theory of concept formation and of what a definition is and ought to be. And philosophers have, they've worked on this. We have the answers, I think. And this is one of the things that I hope maybe University of Austin will teach, is where do these things come from? How do we get them? And I'll just throw out that I think the philosopher Ayn Rand has a really interesting theory on this in her book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology. So if you haven't read that one.
Many years ago in grad school. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope to have more conversations like this one at TOSCon and maybe other podcast episodes in the future. But we'll make sure to get all those links that you mentioned in the show notes. Is there anything else you want people to know about how to keep up with you?
No, I'll see. I'm looking forward to being at TOSCon, and I'll see you, John. I'll see everyone there. And there are some Hungarian students that are going to come when I was just in Hungary. So I'm pretty excited to see them. I'm on Twitter at Peter Boghossian. I have a Substack. I have a YouTube channel. So now that I'm not working for the university, I've putting more time into doing these sorts of things. And I put out conversations that don't go well so people can learn from those. I think that's important. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. It's in Denver at the end of June.
Yeah, June 22nd through 25th. You'll be there talking about effective conversations and doing a panel on civil society with Ayan Hersey Ali, Timothy Sandifer, and Craig Biddle. So those are going to be really cool events. So thanks so much again for taking the time. And
my pleasure.
I look forward to talking more.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.
John. Thank you.